live, I think. And we're live. Wonderful. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our second open day, virtual open day, that is, question and answer session with our lovely undergraduates. They'll all introduce themselves in a second, but I'll just kind of explain what's going on. We've got 45 minutes or 50, depending on how badly we overrun, to answer your questions. Please pop them in the YouTube comments below, and I'll relay them to our ambassadors. So I'm Alfie, I'm the admissions and outreach officer at the English faculty. My pronouns are he, him, and I'll just go around as it is on my Zoom screen. So Heta, would you like to kick us off?
Yep, I'm Heta. I'm a first year at Worcester College. My pronouns are she, her.
Thank you. Macy.
Hiya, I'm Macy. My pronouns are she, her. I'm from County Durham and I study English, obviously, at Brasenose College.
Thank you. Maria.
Hey, I've just graduated from Magdalen. No preference for pronouns.
Wicked, thank you. Iris.
Hi, I'm Iris. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a first year from Brasenose and I'm also from London.
Thanks. Charlotte.
Hi, I'm Charlotte. I've just graduated, also from Brasenose. Pronouns she, her, and I'm from Doncaster.
Brilliant. And lastly, Bethan.
Hi, I'm Bethan. Pronouns she, her. I'm from Newcastle and I'm a first year at LMH.
Wonderful, thank you. So, as we wait for some questions to start ticking through, most of you are first years, just finished your first year's prelims. Some of you have just graduated. What has been your experience of Oxford in general so far? Let's start with Macy.
Well, obviously, kind of with restrictions and things, like our social life hasn't been great, but that does mean that the academic side has really kind of taken precedent this year. So we've had, like, what I find that I've had like extra time kind of sitting around to really enjoy like reading a little bit more, and like taking pleasure in kind of having maybe a little bit more freedom than I usually would, like with time to read and explore different things, which has been nice. And our tutors as well, I mean, it varies from college to college, but our tutors have really kind of gone above and beyond to give us a really good quality of work this year. So I don't feel like I've like been missed out at all. If anything, they've kind of overcompensated for having to do online lessons and things. So I've had a really nice academic experience this year.
Brilliant, thanks. Bethan, how about you?
Yeah, I kind of a similar experience. Really kind of, I think the tutors, I mean, I can only speak for LMH, but our tutors have like gone above and beyond, like with both in kind of like a pastoral way, but also academically providing support and like just little things like sending books out when we're at home and you can't access stuff, and being very understanding, and kind of, I felt like a lot of the time we've been able to kind of guide the path we want to go in, and there's quite a lot of flexibility, despite the fact that we're only first years and we don't really know that much about what we're interested in or not. I found that like I've been able to quite easily direct the learning in the way I wanted to go, whereas A levels, you know, you can have to do set things. And I think that's really like interesting in our experience. Yeah.
Brilliant, thanks. Yeah, so we've heard from two freshers who've just ended first year. So let's ask Charlotte next, who's just graduated.
Yeah, so obviously my experience has really changed over each of my years. So first year was completely free of COVID. Second year was like erupted in the middle, completely at home, and then third year is kind of this weird hybrid thing. But I would say that that's kind of nice in that it is very distinct, different experiences. And like this last year has been obviously difficult because it's had finals and the pandemic. But what I've really felt is that I felt really supported by, as everyone's been saying, like by my tutors, by my sort of college, the tutors, the students, the staff of the college. Like there's been, despite the fact that everyone's had to be apart, I feel like even more this sense of like being almost like rallied around, like this little community has kind of been dealing with this like together. And I think this year being a third year, as people have said, I've also had like more time to focus on my submissions and my coursework and my exams, but also like to have a bit more of a break than I normally would. I wouldn't expect that in third year, but like I think I imagined it would just ramp up and up and up, and actually having like less deadlines and longer time to do each thing has actually been nice. It's been like definitely necessary. So yeah, that was not really what I expected.
Great. Well, it's always nice to bump into new things, I suppose. Given that some of you have just finished first year, I keep harping on, but it's relevant. Some of you graduated. We've got a good question on Slido about course 2 and course 1, and the choice you make at the beginning of second year. Hetta, you're just about to make that choice, or maybe you have made the choice. Could you just walk us through how you made it, or what choice you make, and quickly the difference between course 1 and 2?
Yeah, so I've not actually made my decision yet. Although I do know that I want to do course 1. So there is, once you get into second year, you have the option of 2 courses. Course 1 sort of looks at literature in the time periods between what you study in first year, and then course 2 has a focus more on Old English literature and linguistics and language. So I think the good thing about making that decision is that you'll have the whole of first year to not worry about it, and to know what sort of things you're interested in and where you sort of naturally gravitate towards just through the process of studying in each different term. So you get a good idea of what is sort of your field of interest, and then come summer, or maybe even earlier, you get the decision of whether or not which course you want to go for. So I'm going for course 1 because I like that sort of how it slots in between what we've studied in first year.
Yeah, first year the course is very much the earliest bits of English literature and the most modern bits of, well, most contemporary bits of English literature. So course 2, you get to focus more on the medieval older stuff. Course 1, very generally, you get all the nice in-between interesting literature. Maria, you've just graduated. What choice did you make, and why did you make that choice?
Well, I made choice 1 as well, which is, to be fair, the most popular choice, but I also quite like the way you get to study all the periods throughout your degree if you do choose course 1. I'm also very much a modernist, so one of my favorite papers in first year was the modern paper and literary theory paper. So I really liked looking at the different approaches to literature, like post-structuralism, Marxism, etc. And I felt that course 1, because it looks at periods such as Romanticism, early modern, it was more tailored to my interests, first of all, because it allowed me to study something like Royal Society, which became a thing in early modern period. And I really like the interdisciplinary side of English, which Oxford really allows you to do. So for instance, scientific thought and literature, political thought and literature, that kind of thing. And even though I am very interested in linguistics as well, I felt that course 1 just gave me this breadth, which I really enjoyed in first year.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, I should also mention that course 2 has some more linguistic elements. Charlotte?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I didn't do course 2, but I did do, for my paper 6, I did a course on visual material culture in like the early medieval period. And a lot of the people that did that did course 2, like maybe half and half. So I just would say that like, there's not just that one choice in a way, like there's so much. If you like get into towards third year and you're like, oh, I kind of wish I could do a little bit more of the early stuff, like you could choose that for paper 6, which is your special options module. There's like 30-ish like options. So yeah, there's just a lot of choice basically.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to raise as well, that just because you could choose course 1 or 2 doesn't mean you're limited when it comes to paper 6, which is you have the most choice, the most options open to you. Great, thanks. We've been asked, how do I figure out what course is right for me? So I think I'll ask you all, why did you choose English? Why did you choose Oxford? Iris, you start.
For me, it was quite hard in sixth form because I really liked all of my A levels, and I did 4 A levels. So I did French, English, history, and art, and I really could see myself doing any of them. But the idea of doing a joint honours didn't really appeal to me because people kept telling me that it was kind of you lost the intensity of doing one degree really on one subject. So I thought, which subject could I do that would kind of have all of these things within it, and that seemed to me to be English, and one that I could actually see myself enjoying and think I was quite good at as well. Oxford was, I just fell in love with Oxford when I went around it, and I think it's such a special place to be in terms of teaching, especially in the COVID year. It's so unique. Obviously you've got Cambridge, but that's you know, they're much for muchness in that way, but the teaching is so special here because it's so one-on-one. So whatever subject you do, I actually think you will enjoy it at Oxford because of that intensity of the focus, and it's really personalized. But English, I think here, because it's also really historical, that was kind of where history fell into it, because unlike most degrees that do English, you can kind of pick and choose which things you want to do and specialize in authors quite quickly. But here you're kind of in a way made to do everything and things you don't know anything about. So next year, which is I'm going to second year, which is everything between like Chaucer up into the Romantics, and that is a very like random period of literature for me to study, and I'm quite looking forward to it, but I'm also quite like excited about doing something random and new. And Oxford for me that's a really unique part of the English course at Oxford, that being like the historical element of it. And also like the libraries are amazing. I think if I went into like, material text culture, they've got these really incredible manuscripts, and the Bodleian is just one of the best libraries in the world, so it's great for English.
Definitely is. Thank you. Macy, why did you choose English? How did you find out it was the right course for you?
So English, like Iris was saying, English at Oxford is completely different to English anywhere else. The best thing about English at Oxford is that it could come under, it encompasses so many other subjects. So like Iris touched upon, Iris is really interested in art. She gets to write about art, gets to think about material culture as part of literature. I'm really interested in politics. I've written numerous essays on political writing, not on literature as such or fiction. You can write on political pamphlets, you can write on somebody in the year above me wrote on a famous cookery book. So it's historical. I've written on philosophical work, which is something that we'll look on a lot next year when we think about like 1500s and 1600s and the Enlightenment period, and like Maria was saying, like science comes into that. So you can write on anything here, which is so unlike an English course anywhere else. So for me, it was, I mean, I was umming and ahhing between, I did kind of, while I was doing my A-levels, I was kind of really drawn to PPE, but I was an English girl at heart. And then I managed, when I got to do English, I realised I got to do English and politics and economics if I really want to. Like, you know, you can write on really anything you want. So that's why this course is so special. It's not just English, it's how you apply English skills to anything else that you're interested in.
Fab, thank you. Heta, how did you find that English was right for you?
I think, to be honest, I've always known that I was going to study something English related.
Nice.
But to be fair, I did sort of go through various different options. So I took a gap year. I had initially applied to do English with creative writing. And then at one point I was like, no, I want to do English and history. And then I settled on just English. But like Macy's saying, you can encompass so much of your personal interests and your passions into what you do within the English degree. So me wanting to do more history related things, as Iris was saying, it's such like a wide ranging course that you sort of naturally can include things like historical context because there's just so much of it. It's so ingrained in the course material. And if you want to write about, you know, cookbooks or, you know, personal narratives and things like that, there's so many elements that you can just include in your essays. So English is actually quite sort of wide ranging. I always remember my tutor when we first met, he said that the great thing about English at Oxford is that you can be a little bit of everything. You can be a psychologist, a historian, you can be, you know, a drama critic or whatever, and that all comes under studying English here. And I think that's really unique about the course.
Fab, thank you. We've been asked, how did you find the adaptation period to writing essays in the first year? What were some of the key things that you found were important to include in your essays to strengthen them? So I'll ask a third year, then I'll ask someone who's just done first year. So Charlotte, how did you find that adaptation from presumably sixth form to university?
Yeah, it is strange because it is very different. When you're writing essays at A-level, you're just sort of writing your ideas and you don't have to think about reading things and like citing, referencing things. And it is like, I think we did like our very first essays sort of in like the first week or something. I do remember like us all being like, oh my God, we can't write essays. Like that was, we had a tutorial, the three of us, the very first tutorial, we came out and we all just like, we can't write essays, like we can't write them. But I think you just, because you do it so frequently, like at Oxford, you're doing like an essay a week, like in term time. You just get so much better so quickly. And at the end of the first term, you look back at your first essay and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I wrote that and handed it in. Like, and that sort of changes. So that continues. What I mean, like that continues all the way through. You're like, oh my God, if I don't even want to look at anything you wrote in first years in a strange, it was obviously good at the time, but, or sometimes not. But I think, yeah, it is a big adjustment writing essays that frequently, and also on so many different things every week. You're writing on a different theme, on a different set of texts, and that sort of speed of getting so knowledgeable about something so quickly and then producing something on it and then moving on, it is like an adjustment, but it's an adjustment that everybody is doing. And as everyone's been saying about why they actually like this course, is because of that very reason. So in terms of like what you learn to include, I guess you get your own, you develop your own structure, your own, like, you have to include referencing, secondary criticism and all that sort of thing, but you develop as you go along your own voice and your own style of essay writing, which doesn't happen straight away. I've been being told about like using my own voice for like the whole 3 years, but hopefully I got there like in some way. But it's just the point is that it's a process. It's not like a transition A-level to university and then you're there. You're learning and changing and transitioning all the way through to like the very end of your degree, like where I've just got to.
Yeah, wonderful, thank you. Bethan, you've just finished first year. How have you found the switch?
Yeah, I found it pretty difficult, especially in the first term. Like I just felt like it's such a kind of like, you plunge into the deep end after kind of being told how to write essays at A-level. They don't tell you anything. They just give you a reading list and a question. They say, hey, here you go, have a go. And they give you no nothing. And then you just kind of, how my tutor described it is, you throw a lot of paint at a wall and see what sticks. And maybe the paint will create a nice color and maybe it will look awful. And you just don't know how it's going to end up until you do it. And it's very like trial by fire. You just do it and like you kind of learn as you go. But I think that's kind of a really rewarding experience because you're not being told how to think or how to write. It's kind of up to you in a way, which you've never been able to have that kind of freedom before, which can be very overwhelming sometimes. But I think it does make for very kind of creative, like individual and free thinkers, which I think is like the whole point of doing English, right? And I think there is like a lot of support that uni do give, like your tutors and stuff. But I think they have like this thing called like the Oxford Study Skills Centre, which I think is really helpful kind of for honing kind of like grammar and like basic like how to write a paragraph and how to like write interestingly, and that kind of stuff has really helped me to kind of transition from very boxed in A-level style writing, where I think it's very robotic and very like not necessarily the way you're going to write an essay at uni. And I think it is really difficult, but I think if you're prepared for that and kind of acknowledge that you're not going to be good straight away, because if you were, then what's the point? Like you're meant to struggle. That's the point, because you're learning and your brain is growing. And the finding it difficult is just to show that like you're at Oxford and it's meant to be difficult, and that's kind of the beauty of the degree in a kind of twisted way.
Thanks. Yeah, it's quite a twisted beauty in a way, isn't it? Slightly, I don't want to scare anyone who's just graduated or is just thinking about the future, but do any of you know what you want to do after you finish your degree? We've been asked. I'll go to the people who just graduated first to pick on you. So Maria.
I am very much still in the process of decision. I'm probably going to do masters in St. Andrews, or I might do a master's in international relations in MGIMO. But it's very much like, since English is such a wide-ranging degree, there are very much options. And even though I'm not as eager to stay in academia as I was when I was in school, it's still an option that I'm considering, but I'm still very much in the process of figuring out whether I want to go into international relations, whether I want to do English for a bit, whether I might just, travel and maybe go into journalism for a while, but who knows? Like next year, I'm just doing masters and taking this extra year to think about the future.
That sounds like a very sensible plan. Charlotte, how about you?
Yes, this is the big question that everyone's asking. So at the moment, I thought when I was like starting uni that I would go straight through like the academia route. But I think now I'm more interested in kind of what Alfie's doing, like this stuff, like access and outreach, and like you working in universities, working in like access to higher education, that sort of thing. And obviously, had I not been at Oxford, I'm not sure that would have been my choice, because it's such a big thing at my college and at, like Oxford in general, this sort of thing about access and doing stuff like this and like talking to the next like generation of students. But as Maria said, and as Phil said on the live stream, English Oxford live stream this morning, there's so many things that you could go to, because with what we've been saying about how many different skills and things that you learn about, how comprehensive your knowledge is and how independently you learn to think in this degree, there is a lot of options that are currently quite scary, but will be great when I find them.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe one of the first years, Iris, do you have any ideas for when your degree finally finishes?
It's a really, really big question. My parents have started to push it now, which I find a bit scary, but it's not because it's an English problem, it's anyone's problem when they leave uni.
Yeah, of course.
These amazing skills you especially have from Oxford, because your mind's grown so much. Already this first year, I feel like a completely different person at the end of this year, so I did when I joined. I also had a gap here, so I had that kind of little gap of thinking that the world is actually a lot bigger than from just school to uni and then maybe a master's and then more uni if you kept doing that, because it can seem quite formulaic just having that progression. But I think exploring around, I might do some law work experience. I'm not really sure yet. I do feel very artistic still. Like I kind of think that sector might be interesting. My tutor's really into theatre, and the idea of putting on plays, and especially in the pandemic, like how the arts have struggled and being able to revive that, especially for a modern audience on the internet and those kind of challenges that art's facing now. But to be honest, I could see myself doing anything. I feel like I do feel my skill set isn't very honed, it's quite broad, which is useful. But also I'm not very practical, so I don't really have any idea how you actually get a job or anything. But I think that's just an exciting problem for later me to find out.
It's not something you have to think about tomorrow, so that's nice. Brilliant, thanks. We've got quite a nice question about how the course allows you to apply or consider different literature theories when analysing texts, for example, critical race theory, queer theory, Freudian theories. Macy, do you have anything you can share on that point?
Well, I did find, so paper 1 is the introduction to language and literature paper, which is the theory and linguistic paper, which you are then supposed to apply to the rest of your course. But it's not rigid. You're meant to kind of take the ideas that you learn in theory and try, maybe if they're useful, to apply them to the rest of your course. So there's no tick list that like you must include a critic like you have to at A-level. It's not like that. It's supplementary and it's meant to help your argument if you can include those ideas. I'm really into Marxist theory and cultural materialism, which is the most boring of them all. I'll hold my hands up to that. But I think it's interesting to think about, we think a lot about the use and the worth of literature in the degree here, and if you actually think about, we learn quite a lot about literature as a material product and as a consumer product, and I find that quite interesting in terms of what sells and what becomes popular literature. And there are a lot of authors, like Dickens is a good example, who is aware of the materiality of a text, and really kind of playing into the fiction and playing with the kind of conscious reality / unreality of fiction. And if anybody's interested in social realism or realism as a genre, that's something you can really get your teeth into through theory and kind of understanding whose idea of reality is this portrayed in fiction. So that's something that we think about quite a lot in paper 1. If you're interested in theory, then those are ideas that you can apply throughout the degree.
Brilliant, thanks. I just want to pick up on something you mentioned about the idea of literature as having worth or value. I'd like to ask you all very quickly, have your ideas on literature and its value for I don't know, just for reading, for studying, have they changed before you came to Oxford and after, or as you are in Oxford? Bethan, start with you.
I think I kind of always had an understanding of literature as being something so valuable, kind of literature at any mode of like artistic expression, because literature is like so binary. It could be just written words on a page, but like a film or anything, like any medium of kind of artistic expression of opinions or information, I think is just so valuable. And I feel like everyone here can agree, you spend a lot of time justifying your choice to do English to people of other subjects. A lot of STEM people, per se, want to criticize the choice of English. People call it not a real subject. So I spend a lot of time being like, well, if you didn't have literature, you wouldn't be able to read your textbooks about atomic theory or physics or whatever you want to call it. Like, I don't know science, but you can, it's kind of the binding matter of every subject and every kind of academic pursuit. So it's not even just framed in terms of literature, like the canon or Dickens or whatever. It's like, it's everything you read. And without reading, we can't do anything, basically. So I think in that way, like, it's so important. And I think that's something kind of I've become aware that there's literature in the literary sense, but there's also literature in like the other senses. And I think it's important to kind of understand the value of literature as a medium outside kind of our academic circle, to say.
Great, thank you. Maria, I'll phrase the question better. How has Oxford changed or affected your ideas of the value of literature?
Actually, I think slightly paradoxically, it made me better at filtering things through, almost, in a sense that before, and that's partially because I come from Russia, where they tell you if it's a classic piece, like work of literature, you have to like it, otherwise you have no appreciation for Dostoevsky or whatever, right? But in Oxford, because you are in this critical environment, you do grow to realize that there are parts of, say, George Eliot, which are great, and some parts, where she might have had like a bad day. And you learn to appreciate that, the value of literature is not like, yes, it is culturally construed, but you're allowed to have your personal opinions about it. And it's not some sort of, abstract platonic form of literature floating around. Literature interacts with us. And yes, I think having a reverent attitude to literature is healthy, but this ability to criticize and pick, like, recognize bad things in good literature and recognize good things in literature that is often dismissed, whether it be like contemporary literature or something that is not usually considered as literature, like pamphlets of Victorian period or whatever. I think that's one of the skills that you learn in Oxford, this kind of critical mentality of filtering things through and having your own opinion.
Yeah, thank you. I love that idea of George Eliot having a bad day, just like the rest of us. Heta, how has Oxford impacted your ideas of the value of literature?
I think mine's sort of like a hybrid of both Bethan and Maria's sort of takes on it. And I think as well, like, even from my interview, I was sort of being challenged to think about how I think about literature. So some of like the books I'd mentioned in my personal statement, if they got brought up, I'd be sort of challenged to actually criticize them and think, okay, but why do I think that this is so good? What if it's just this? And in the end, I was sort of like, okay, that was my favorite book. I feel a bit, bruised there. But it forces you to sort of look at literature from different angles. And as Maria says, to pick out the good in sort of dismissed literature, which we also study as well as just the canon. We do make sure to sort of study more abstract, lesser known texts, but also to pick out the bad in staple literature. Like, I will forever bash Uncle Tom's Cabin, but I can also still appreciate that, yes, it was very culturally important, whilst I still take issue with some of the things and themes in there. So I think you learn to both value literature, as Bethan said, as binding and very important to sort of the fabric of how society works, but also to appreciate that it's not sort of this holy thing to put up on a pedestal all the time. Like, even the greats have their bad days. Yeah,
brilliant, thank you. Charlotte, same question for you. How has Oxford changed or improved maybe your understanding of the value of literature?
God, this is actually like I've been sitting here trying to think of an answer the whole time. It's such a big question. I think that when you're at school studying literature, I think you're studying such a small number of things, and often it is the very famous or classical things. They try and like maybe slip one book in that's like a little bit less like sort of overdone, but like you are sort of going over the same ground sometimes, and like or you're not even studying the whole text, you're kind of studying this part, this is the part you should read. And I think being at Oxford has actually, I've tried being here to sort of change that idea of something only being useful if it's useful, either to read just because you're reading for pleasure over here with these books, and then these books over here I'm reading for my degree, and it's only relevant or useful if I end up putting it in my exam, and if I don't write it in my exam it was useless. Instead trying to change that thing that from school, whereby like just having read some of that book, or just having you read it but maybe not for pleasure over here, but or maybe this book I read for pleasure over here is really interesting, actually it's made me think about this that I'm going to put in my dissertation or something. Learning to like connect and not see, as other people have been saying, the idea of like literary and non-literary, or like school academia sort of worthy text and then something else. So yeah, like kind of breaking the binary and like making connections, probably.
Brilliant, thanks. Iris, how about you?
Yeah, everyone said it very eloquently. Obviously, I really appreciate the value of literature personally, because otherwise my degree would seem quite futile. I think I've enjoyed this year in a kind of more unusual way. I really enjoyed studying the classics. So I'm not going to, although they have their moments of, I don't know, terrible writing and just awful themes. I still really highly value those, and they're canonized for a reason. But I think what I've liked is kind of investigating non-literary texts in a through a lens which is still with the way you analyze critical literature and novels, maybe like pinpointing language and how that can feed into kind of language in everyday use, like political language, language in media and advertising, language in like journalism. That's part of our course in paper 1, which I found really interesting, to kind of look at things that I'm experiencing and exposed to every day that you kind of just filter through. But analysing that really deeply is maybe much more aware of the kind of the way that you can be manipulated in society via language, and how that, you know, creates everyone's identity. And I find that really interesting. I'm not saying that's a particular part of the Oxford English course, but the intensity of this degree has really kind of raised my awareness of those aspects of the written word, as opposed to just canonical literature.
Brilliant, thank you. And Macy, how has Oxford changed your concept of the value of literature?
Well, again, in paper 1, when we've like looked at like analyze linguistics and linguistic use, we've also alongside that we've studied some kind of like some core texts, perhaps like non-canonized, popular, but perhaps not, perhaps non-canonized or like non-kind of classical works that employ like dialect based and speak in like a non in a sorry, not, it's been so long since I did paper 1, in a non-standard. So like books like Samuel Selvon's Lonely Londoner is a great book. It's like written in like a London hybrid Creole, and Their Eyes Are Watching God, Zora Neale Hurston, is a really cool like Harlem Renaissance book that we study, where she employs that a non-standard speech throughout the whole novel. So you get in a glimpse of not only what it means to kind of be against a Western standard of what's canonized and what's popular, but also doing that through an individual voice. So I've seen the worth of literature coming through, coming through in the way that language is actually played with itself, not just in the novel, not just like as the complete product as a novel, but how a novel kind of reflects life and how life is embedded in a novel. And the way that language works, like to give worth to language, not just literature. Like that was a bit convoluted, but I hope you know what I meant.
I got you. Cool, thanks. So kind of just to pick up on what you just mentioned, the very Western canon, as we've all seen throughout the pandemic, it's highlighted deep inequalities and issues in society across the world. But what's your experience of the Oxford curriculum and what we teach being diversified? How have you seen that start to happen? I wonder if we'll start with Iris.
I think it's my tutor really makes an effort to challenge what we see as being worthy of studying. I think in terms of when you come from school, you have these ideas of you will study these texts, and you're still encouraged to read things like Middlemarch and Dickens. But she definitely made an effort to include things like Their Eyes Are Watching God, kitchen sink dramas from African American women's point of views that were kind of challenging the very, very British male heterosexual lens. It obviously comes down to personal choice, because everything that you read is your own decision to read it. So how far you take that is completely up to you. You could actually almost avoid a lot of the canonicized literature by making those choices, because that's how the canon, I think, is formed, is your choice to write about different texts that form outside of those kind of Western, European literary boundaries. But I do think my tutor has definitely made enough to do that. It's hard to do that in terms of the Old English context, and obviously it's very limited and what's actually around to study in the older periods. But especially in modern literature, I think it's in a way I haven't really studied any of the modernist classics so much as I have. I don't know. Now I'm trying to think about it. I still just kind of revert to things that I knew already before I came. But that was kind of a failure on my part not to be more experimental in what I read. I think most of our year has done really interesting stuff with people I'd never heard of before I arrived, looking at cultures that I'm really unfamiliar with. So I really enjoyed hearing about their perspectives on those texts as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Maria, how have you encountered, non-Western, non-standard, as it was, literature in the curriculum here?
I think, just as Iris has mentioned, there is a real push to widen the curriculum, and because of this kind of welcoming attitude towards any text, especially, I think, if anything, sometimes there is an advantage to studying something not canonized, because it means that it's not overwritten about in the critical theory, which means you're more likely to add to the conversation. And because Oxford values originality, that kind of enables less canonized works to become more prominent, precisely because, it's easier to write something new and original on works that haven't constantly been under critical scrutiny. And I think even for the older period, if it's something like medieval literature, nowadays looking at something like female mystical texts is almost a default. So that's something that didn't used to be in the canon, but is now very much embedded in how we look at medieval literature. So something like Julian of Norwich or Marjorie Kemp have now entered, the new canon, and it is expanding. And even if, you're not the kind of person to prefer to look at that text and you prefer the canonized text, you could always adopt theory, which Macy talked about before, whether it be feminist, post-colonial, to look at canonized texts. So it's not merely the fact that you can look at any text you like, but also the fact that you can adopt any critical theory you like, and that's very liberating.
Brilliant, thank you. And Heta, how have you experienced the diversification of the curriculum?
Yeah, so I think that going into a degree at Oxford is something I was very aware of and almost hesitant. I wanted to engage with texts that were more diverse, because it wasn't something that we really had access to throughout all of English in secondary school. But I do think there was definitely a push to make the course that we study more diverse. So we did slave narratives in our 19th century literature, which I don't think the year above us did. And even with things like Old English literature, you can still look at it through certain theories and lenses. So with things like St. Eugenia and things like that, there are sort of queer lenses you can look at those texts through. So there is ways of diversifying what may not initially look diverse. But also I do just think that there was sort of a very much an inclusion of making the course all the way through as diverse as it can be, and that can involve drawing on sort of non-canon texts, but also just making sure that there is a sort of wide range of experiences within the novels that we study. So it's not all, from one certain lens, and there is sort of a broad spectrum from which you can view the text that we study. That's not just, racial diversity, it's sexuality, gender, the whole sort of range.
Brilliant, thanks. I'll put the same question to you, Charlotte. How have you experienced that over your 3 years? Have you noticed a big change in that you've been here before and after the beginning of the pandemic?
Yeah, I think so. The people that in first year sort of been saying that that it's strange with those periods, because there is definitely this sort of like, there's the names that like the Victorian, the modern paper, there's the stuff that you're gonna do some Dickens, you're gonna do some etc. And I think often it does come down to choice, because the Oxford course does give so much choice. The problem with that is obviously the canon is what we're not always making a choice, even if we think we are. Like, we're going with what we know, we're going with what we've been told, like it's just there. And so I think what I was saying about tutors like introducing us to new things and to different perspectives and different texts you might not have heard of is really valuable. And I think my experience has been, yeah, it has changed, but maybe that was because as you go through the course you have more of your own choice, or you're maybe just used to making your own choice, because you could very well go in for first year and be like, I want to write this and this and go looking into it, but are you going to do so? Like, are you going to do it straight away? I think as I've gone through, once you're into third year, you're doing paper 6, which is an option that you've picked, and you can do anything within that. You're doing a dissertation, which really can be about anything. So I think that by third year, you've developed that independence. And something they're teaching is, obviously there's far more you could do in terms of the lectures they're provided and things like that. There's definitely been a change in that as well. But also the course just teach you over time to be confident in choosing different things, looking for different things in research skills, finding out those other narratives and having the confidence to say, this is what I want to do, this really specific thing, and this has not been looked at, and having that, like somebody said, that confidence to enter a critical conversation about something that is quite new and say, I want to sort of make my mark on this. And that's so valuable, and that's something that Oxford students, academics can do to sort of diversify the curriculum, diversify people's knowledge about literature and widen it.
Brilliant, thank you. We've got another nice little question, which I think you can all answer. What has been your favourite book to study? We'll start with Macy, because I saw you grin.
Okay, so my favourite author is D.H. Lawrence. And he's usually in plenty of trouble because feminist scholars tore him apart. And when I came to my interview, I'd only read theory on Lawrence, never actually read any Lawrence. So I'd only read I've read Kate Millett's Sexual Politics, and I've read some other feminist writers on Lawrence, and kind of really berating him because, you know, a lot of his writing is, some of his writing is questionable. And my tutor said, read some Lawrence. She said, just read some Lawrence, just wait and see what you think. And you know, and he turned out to be my favorite author. So his work, he's a very unstable author, but he acknowledges that. So every single one of his works is different. So The Rainbow is an absolutely beautiful one of his first novels. It's amazing. And that's about kind of female sexual emancipation, theology, working class narratives, all sorts of stuff. So I've loved kind of looking at sometimes controversial texts and actually giving them a read, because sometimes the critics have a point to make, but you're also encouraged to make your own opinion too. So I enjoyed reading all of his work.
Wonderful, thank you. Maria, a favourite book or author that you've studied?
Very difficult, but historically it has been Virginia Woolf, and I've kind of first I was exposed to her novels, and I remember finding them extremely poetic back when I was doing A-levels, but whilst in Oxford, I really engaged with her essay writing as well, and I think in her essays she almost excels almost better than in her novels. So she has been my all-time favorite, but honestly, it's such a difficult choice if you're an English student. Like, I also like, you know, T.S. Eliot and Conrad, like even someone like Jonathan Swift can be hilarious. It's just, you kind of look at different authors and all of them have something different to contribute. It's almost like listening to different types of music. Sometimes you want something, you know, melancholy, something you want something joyful because you're in that kind of mood. And it's absolutely the same thing with authors.
Really, I think that's a really nice perceptive point. Yeah, sorry to kind of spring such a mean question on you. At least I'm not asking you for your favourite book of all time. Charlotte, let's go to you. What's been your favourite thing to study at Oxford?
Yeah, it's so hard. I think what comes to mind is when I did my dissertation, I did it on late 19th century, early 20th century feminist utopias, which was, I don't know where that came from. Like, it's not like I literally hadn't read anything like that before. Like, I was interested in the genre, like as many people that were my age in like 2012 when dystopia was just everywhere. But I don't know how I got to that, but I discovered Charlotte Perkins Gilman wrote Her Land, which is a feminist utopia, but she also wrote a lot of other things. She was very interesting, but also quite controversial. She had some brilliant things to say about feminism, but also she was involved in the movement towards eugenics, and she had some very interesting views about race. And that was such a fascinating, because I really enjoyed reading her work, and I read quite a lot of her work, even though I was using Her Land primarily for the dissertation. And it was sort of it was reconciling all those different things and trying to work out, like, and trying to understand that perspective, because like something like that, your reaction is, oh my god, like, you know, especially post the events that happened after she was around, sort of early 1900s. The events that happened after that, you can't even understand why someone would have that view. But then it's trying to kind of see those arguments, and it's just a fascinating, and then see where those things come up in her fiction and where in her utopias was fascinating. Like seeing the intersection of all these different ideas and all her different types of writing, like Maria was saying, looking at the same author but like different types of work is always really interesting, and just like such a rich thing to do, like rather than reading one thing by a person, you build up this image of them and sort of get into their head. I think that's really cool.
Brilliant, thanks. Bethan, come to you. What's been your favourite book or thing to study at Oxford so far?
It's funny actually, because the things I hated reading, I love studying. Like, it's so weird backwards, because I read What by Samuel Beckett is maybe one of the most frustrating books to read, because the main character basically, like, his whole thing is he can't speak, he can't communicate. And so the whole book is like, the chronology is all back to front, the words are back to front. There's whole pages where he just like repeats the same words over and over again in different like varying orders. It's maddening to read. I hated it. I wanted to throw the book across the room. I such just like disgust at this book. And I was like, oh, I'll have to do an essay on it now because I picked it, so it's too late. And I did all the reading, and it was one of the most fascinating essays I've written. I think one of my best essays, so much about kind of the binaries of language and what counts as literature and expression, and kind of how things kind of crumble apart when it means the most, and things like that. I just think it's really interesting, because at Oxford, because you're forced to study such a wide range of books, and books that you might never necessarily pick to choose to kind of read for pleasure. I think it kind of opens your mind to stuff like that, which you necessarily just wouldn't do, because why would you read a book which you want to throw across the room in normal life? You just wouldn't. But I think that was probably one of my favorite and worst things to read, weirdly.
That's a great experience. I love that. Heta, how about you? Favorite thing to study at Oxford?
I think it's a toss-up between Giovanni's Room and Their Eyes Were Watching God, because I loved those books when I read them just in preparation for the term, but I also loved studying them. And I think in a way Bethan's right, is that some of the books that I hated studying were like some of the most interesting essays that I wrote. But also, when you love a book, there is just as much sort of nitty-gritty that you can get into it because you are so passionate about those books. So yeah, those two were definitely standouts for me, because I did finish them and cry at the end of each.
Very nice, as all good literature does. Brilliant, thanks. And finally, Iris, what's been your favourite book or thing to study? You've had the longest to prepare, so I want a good answer.
Okay, unpopularly, I really love Bleak House by Charles Dickens, and I was really impressed that I read it myself, because it's really, really fat, and everyone kind of blew yawns, and I said I really liked it. But I've just really got into the kind of weird bits of Dickens. He has these random characters that kind of just seem to fit out of nowhere, but they're just so interesting to really engage with, like why you would put something so random and so apparently meaningless in a book, and eccentricity. I'm just really attracted to that. I also really like looking at things and objects, because my house is full of things that you can't really see from here, but I'm such a clutter brain. I'm obsessed with hoarding, and that sort of context. And Bleak House is full of that, and the weirdness of Victorian Britain in that way. There's also a lot of theory that goes into kind of why those things are in Dickens, and why something kind of pointless actually can tell a lot about the economics of the time and the social politics of the time, which I really like looking into, again, because the theory kind of enhances the way you read a book. But I don't know, I love Virginia Woolf. Her short stories are absolutely brilliant, and I highly recommend them to everyone. So many books, so little time, to be honest. I think I would say Bleak House kind of was a defining one for me, because I was kind of just, I didn't really like that I liked Dickens, but I do. So yeah, maybe Bleak House.
Brilliant, well thank you. And with so many books and so little time, that really brings our stream time to the end. So a massive thank you to all of our wonderful undergraduates. Thank you for giving up your time to answer these questions, and thank you to everybody who's asked questions. We are still open on Slido for the next hours. Sarceltis is giving a lecture on Streetcar Named Desire, B2 and the Critics Movement, and that will be starting in 10 minutes. So I'll hopefully see you all then. Great, thank you.